Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to UUSF Forum. My name is Jeff Peckrell, and I am the coordinator for Forum. And Forum is kind of a project of the Human Rights Working Group, and there are three of us committee chairs of that. Myself, Melvin Starks, who's over at the breakfast table and does the wonderful job of creating this great breakfast for us every Sunday, and Dolores Perez-Halbrun. If you're not receiving our emails, then there's a sign-up sheet for that, so you can get like 1 or 2 emails a week from us to tell you about what's coming up at Forum. And I see there's another sign-up sheet back there, which is from the Answer Coalition. Our speaker today is Richard Becker from Answer. So if you'd like to get their messages, please sign that sheet. Just to tell you about a few other things that are coming up. So next Sunday, Meg Whitaker Green, a retired UU minister and a beloved member of our community here, is going to be giving another talk relating to Women's History Month. And so she's going to be telling us about a very important civil rights attorney named Anne Fagan Ginger. So please come back for that next Sunday. I think it's going to be a great and very informative talk. Looking forward to that. Then we'll have 2 weeks off from Forum. There'll be no Forum here at 9:30 anyway, on either April 5th or the 12th. And then when we come back on the 19th, it will be Ecology Month, Earth Day Month, right? So we're having somebody from Recology come to tell us about recycling, what it is, what it isn't, and I think that should be an interesting presentation. It's a lot more than just how to sort your recycling. It's like what's really going on with recycling, probably emphasizing reuse instead of recycling. Okay, and then the last Forum of April will be on the 26th, and we'll have the Socialist Party candidates for statewide office in California, PSL. 3 of them will be coming to talk to us and their ideas about better governance for California. So that's what's coming up. Oh, and next Sunday this Sunday after church, there's a sign-making event. I think it's in this room, Dolores? Is that where we're making the signs? Because this coming Saturday, no? In the chapel, okay. After church today in the chapel, people are making signs for the No Kings March. Okay, that's on Saturday, this coming Saturday, the 28th. I believe it's at 11:30 a.m. at the Embarcadero. A lot of people are going down there to make their voices heard about what's going on in this country. Okay, so that's it for announcements. Now we'll do our Ohlone land recognition, and then I'll introduce our speaker, which is Richard Becker from the Answer Coalition.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, let me. Thank you. Little mic check. We, the members of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, acknowledge that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who inhabited what is now the San Francisco Peninsula. Anthropologists say that these indigenous communities lived in and moved through this area for over 10,000 years. As the original stewards of this land, the Ohlone and other indigenous peoples understood the interconnectedness of all things and maintained harmony with all of nature for millennia. We honor them now for their enduring commitment to our Mother Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And it is my pleasure now to introduce Richard Becker to the podium.
Well, it's good to see everyone this morning at a very tenuous time in history again. And the subject that the billing is that why is there endless war in the Middle East? But I think I would like to start and talk about the war that's going on right now. Because I think that's what's on everyone's mind. And hopefully a week from yesterday, on the No Kings Day, the next one of the main things that's going to be featured is going to be the opposition to this war. And I think that millions of people are going to be coming out. More than 3,000 protests are scheduled to take place next week. And the number is continuing to grow. It would be the largest number of protests in U.S. history if that's how it plays out. And I think there's no reason to believe that it will be anything other. So I wanted to talk a little bit, though, about to start with, about the war on Iran. And, we have been treated to a campaign of vilification of Iran now that has gone on ever since the Iranian Revolution of 1978, which came to power in 1979. And it's been endless. And, many people are swayed to believe that somehow Iran presents a threat to the United States and to the world. But I would like to say a little bit about the modern history of Iran, because Iran has a very, very long history. It goes back 600 years BC, the Persian Empire, and it became really a neo-colony of Britain, part of the British Empire, in the late 1800s, very early 1900s. And Britain, in 1908, discovered oil. And it's before oil was discovered in a lot of other parts of the Middle East, and that was to come a little bit later. But in 1913, the leadership of the British, of the colonial office was Winston Churchill at that time. Well, actually, at that time, he was the head of the Admiralty, the Navy. And he decided, and this was just before World War I, decided to convert the British Navy to oil from coal. And the British Navy, of course, the British Navy was what the British Empire was really based on as far as its power. And the British Navy, so it was converted in 1913. The next year, World War I started. And that conversion led to Britain exploiting the oil resources. People can see the book, you may be familiar with it, All the Shah's Men, Stephen Kinzer. If people haven't seen it, it'd be a good time to pick up that book about this history. And from that time on until the end of World War II, the British Navy ran on Iranian oil. The British Empire ran on Iranian oil. And this is something, of course, we don't get any of this in the news, this history. And it's a very terrible history because they said, they called the so-called houses that people lived in the oil region, the Abadan region of Iran, Paper City. They called it Paper City because people were living in houses, so-called houses that were made of paper. They were making not 50 cents an hour, 50 cents a day. 50 cents a day. And they lived in oil. The people lived in oil. It was the most atrocious conditions that were imposed on the people of Iran at that time for the benefit of to keep the British Navy running, to keep the British Empire the British Empire. In 1951, the first democratically elected government came into being, and then the government was headed by Mohammad Mossadegh. How many people know about this, Mohammed? Quite a few people here know about it. So Mossadegh came in, and it's famous because the CIA had carried out a overthrow of a government, a coup, in 1949 in Syria, which isn't very well known at all, and didn't have the kind of significance, really, that what was going to happen in the 1950s. And the Mossadegh government Mossadegh himself was a secular nationalist. He was not a communist. He was progressive in relation to what had come before. And he decided at that time the oil company by then the oil was being run by the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. Does anybody know what the name of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company is today? BP, British Petroleum, yep. And it was the same ones, but Mossadegh nationalized it, and the idea was that the oil would be used for the benefit of the people of Iran instead of for the British Empire and for the Anglo-Persian Oil Company and so forth. And his government did this, and he was labeled then a fanatic and vilified, and leading the charge against Mossadegh and denouncing him was the New York Times. And the New York Times was fanatically anti-Mossadegh. They talk about fanatics, but they were fanatics. And they slapped the British and the U.S. together put a boycott, an embargo on Iranian oil. They couldn't sell their oil on the world market. And of course, that oil is what could have enabled them. It was a very poor country to develop and so forth. And it created the conditions so that in 1953, there was a move by the CIA together with the British MI5, the British, or is it MI6? Which one is it? 5 or 6. Anyways, the secret services of the two combined to bring about the overthrow of the Mossadegh government. And the Mossadegh government, Mossadegh was put into house arrest, and he remained in such for the rest of his life. So I want to say what the New York Times said about this afterwards, because I think it's very important. Excuse me? Oh, okay. The New York Times wrote the editorial board. It wasn't just some opinion. This is the editorial board. Underdeveloped countries, this is after the overthrow, underdeveloped countries with rich resources now have an object lesson in the heavy cost that must be paid by one of their numbers, which goes berserk with fanatical nationalism. I mean, think about that. Berserk with fanatical nationalism, because Mossadegh dared to have the oil resource used for the benefit to uplift the people of Iran. And that made him, and the New York Times hopes that if this bloody coup that's been carried out, will be, that'll be a warning to any other country that thinks that their resources are for them. The reality of this is really, those resources, wherever the oil is, and Trump is the perfect example of this, by the way. I think he's the most openly, that he wants their oil. He wants to choose the leaders of the country and so forth. So this is what happened in 1953. 1953 was the overthrow of the first democratically elected government in Iran. And for the next 25 years, Iran was run by the U.S. and a secret service, as a secret police force that they created called the SAVAK. And the SAVAK, it's estimated, tortured 100,000 Iranians, mostly young people who rebelled against the system. That it was an extremely brutal torture regime. And the secret police that were created after the coup, the SAVAK, were trained. The leader of the training was Norman Schwarzkopf Sr. Some people will remember that name. Schwarzkopf Jr. was the military commander of the 1991 Gulf War against Iraq. So his father trained the police. There was this brutal regime. The secret police of Iran were everywhere. They were in the universities in the United States. They were identifying people so that they could be, their families could be tortured and murdered. But nevertheless, there was a huge movement of Iranian students that arose in the United States, the Iranian Student Association, which had different factions in it with different political alliances, but were mostly for fighting against the Shah's regime. They had put the Shah, the King of Kings, had been placed back on the throne after the overthrow of Mossadegh. In 1977, he came to the United States, and he visited the White House. I believe it was 77. And there was a huge demonstration where they landed the helicopter on the White House lawn, and there were thousands of Iranian students and some supporters outside. They broke through the fences, and they were advancing, and the secret police fired tear gas to drive them back. And then the wind shifted, and it got Carter and the Shah, which was a kind of a happy moment for everyone who was observing. Jimmy Carter, he praised the Shah that year as an island of stability. And then the next year, the Shah was overthrown. The revolution that took place in Iran had different factions within it. It had a number of left-wing factions, communist, socialist factions, but the dominant faction was the Islamic faction, because from the time of the coup in 1953 until the revolution that took place, it was impossible to carry out any opposition political activity without you ending up in prison, being tortured, and often killed. So the only place where there was really room, there was space for politics, even though it had to be politics that were seen as religious, was in the mosques, inside the mosque. So during that period of time, Khomeini, who became the leader after the revolution, had been exiled himself to France. He had lived in France since the early 1960s. But he had a network. There was a network of people who were organizing. And when the revolution came, those forces emerged as the dominant forces, as the predominant ones. And also, there was a campaign against the new government before it was in the early days after the revolution, that carried out a campaign of terror, and then they called it a campaign of terror against the government, and that resulted in an extremely harsh reaction from the government. Not that it can be excused what they did, but it was it led to what the conditions that have existed in Iran. In 1980, the U.S. encouraged Iraq to attack Iran. The revolution had come to power in February of 79, and then there was the hostage crisis that took place, the seizure of the U.S. embassy in Iran by the students, and were supported by the dominant Islamic force in the government, the Khomeini government. And what they saw in 1979 was what they thought was going to be an attempted repeat of what had happened in 1953, when the Shah had left the country, and then the CIA and the MI and the British intelligence worked together to overthrow the government of Mossadegh, and then they brought the Shah back. So when the Shah left this time after the coup, the Iranian people thought, okay, the CIA is still here, they're in the government, and they're going to bring the Shah back. So they demanded that the Shah be returned to them and imprisoned. And the U.S. wasn't going to do that, and that led to the takeover of the embassy. And how many people remember this? A lot of people here remember this. And do you remember that there was a show, actually? It was on every night, and it was called America Held Hostage, after the embassy was seized. America held hostage, and it went on for 444 days. And then the hostages were released, the embassy, and it was then called Nightline. The show Nightline emerged from that. But it was it's part of, I'm saying this because this is part of what has shaped the consciousness of people in the United States about Iran and why, Iran has been seen as being, this demonic government, and this has been promoted ever since. In other words, Iran has never been forgiven for having a revolution. The revolution was not a socialist revolution, it was a nationalist revolution. And it was determined to use the resources of the country and to end the domination of the U.S. oil companies and so forth. So now there's a war, the war that's going on. The war, I think, we can see has not gone, for anyone who's paying attention, has not gone the way that the U.S. government, that Trump and his cabal of his gangster group, the way that they thought it was going to happen. They thought Trump, I think, thought it would be over in 3 or 4 days. It's not over. It's not anywhere near over. Art, who's back on the table, told me, I didn't see Fareed Zakaria this morning, but said he's kind of freaking out on CNN about what's happening now. But it's a very devastating war. I mean, the thousands of air sorties have been flown. Much of Iran has been, in many areas, have been destroyed, but they have not been defeated. It's clear that has not happened. The cost of the war is unbelievable. The cost of the first 7 days of the war cost $11 billion. I mean, it's not $1 billion a day. It's more than that that's going on. And the casualties appear to be mostly Iranian civilians. At the same time, the war was launched as a coordinated war by the U.S. and Israel. And Israel is also carrying out the war in Lebanon. And so the war has widened. The war has widened to take in all of the Gulf states. And by the way, we should mention that the Gulf states are incredible. I mean, like Qatar, 89% of the population of Qatar are non-Qataris. They can never have citizenship. 89%. And the United Arab Emirates, 87%. And most of the population is Indian, Pakistani, Filipino, Nepalese, and they can never become citizens of those states, and they have no rights, and they do all the work. They do all the manual labor is done by, and these are the friends of the United States. These are family monarchies they're family monarchies that are really secret police states themselves, all of them. There's no rights for the people, and so forth. And this doesn't play into the narrative that we are treated to all the time in the media here. So where is it going? We don't know where it's going, but we do know that the people of the U.S. have to take action. And so we're looking to next Saturday as a day of massive action against not only the wars that are going on, but against the Trump program as a whole. So one thing I want to say about the war that I think needs to be said is that in some of the mainstream media, they say, well, this is a war of choice. A war of choice. War of choice sounds kind of bland. There's another way to say war of choice, and that is Class A war crime. Because that's a more accurate description of what we're seeing go on, both from the Israeli leaders and from the U.S. leaders who decided to launch a war against a country that did not threaten them. I mean, where does that come from, Class A? It comes from the United States. And it was Jackson, who was the head of the Nuremberg Tribunal after World War II, the trial of the Nazi leaders. And the Nazi leaders who paid the ultimate price for what they had done, who were hung, convicted of Class A war crimes, meaning that they had launched a war against other countries that did not threaten them. And that what makes it the Class A war crime, what makes it the worst crime, the most serious crime of international law, not that the leaders here pay any attention to international law anymore, but it's worth saying that that international law which is violated by the crime against peace, as it's called, or the Class A war crime, is what opens the way to all the other crimes that follow it. All the death and destruction that comes afterwards flows from this, which kind of some people call the original sin of international law. So this is what we're seeing, and it's not new. I mean, the wars against Iraq, Iraq did not threaten the U.S. despite the pretenses. They all, the people who've committed these go on to, live out their lives in luxury. But it's worth for us to say to people that this is a war crime and we repudiate it, and we say it's not being done in our name. We refuse that. So I want to say a little bit about what's going on with Israel right now in regard to the war. Because it's not getting the same kind of publicity, but it's getting some, that Israel is not only at war with Iran, it's also at war with Lebanon and with the Hezbollah in Lebanon, but with Lebanon as a whole. And it's important to know that what they're trying to do, what the plan is illustrated by the fact that today the so-called defense minister of the state of Israel is Katz, and at Netanyahu's beck and call said that they should bomb the bridges over the Litani River and housing and residences in the southern part of Lebanon and more. Why would they bomb the bridges over the Litani River? I think it's because they don't intend for that area to be part of Lebanon anymore. That what Israel plans is to been the aspiration of the leaders of Israel, and particularly of the leaders of the Likud side, to expand the territory. I mean, actually, the whole Israeli ruling elite has been for this, have always recognized. And in the book that we did, Palestine, Israel, and the U.S. Empire, talk about how in 1949, Moshe Dayan, who was a young military officer, and this is a year after the war that where Israel conquered 78% of Palestine, said to U.S. officials, our borders are ridiculous. They have to be at least on the West Bank, on the Jordan River, meaning the West Bank. And the aspiration to create a greater Israel has always been there. The Israeli leaders have always considered their country to be too small, and that it needed to be. So I think that it's now clear, and it's not a secret, that the intention is to keep and in the same way, to keep Lebanon south of the Litani River in the same way that Israel took the Golan Heights, most of the Golan Heights from Syria in the 1967 war, and is continuing to take more and more of the West Bank as the war goes on. So the war that Israel is waging together with the U.S., they have different objectives. Israel has this objective, I think now, that number one, it wants to be the only military power that has any power in the whole region. They've wanted that for a long time. That's what this is really about, and this is what the whole thing about the nuclear program and all of that. We should remember that when the JCPOA, the Joint Plan of Action, that was signed back in the Obama administration, made it clear that Iran was not going to develop a nuclear weapon. Trump tore that up in 2018. So it's not that they really think that's what's happening, that Iran is developing nuclear weapons or something like that. Although you could hardly blame Iran at this point after what's been going on. But really what Israel wants is to have no other power in the region and to expand its territory and to use the current situation, and both in regard to Gaza and regard to the West Bank and regard to Lebanon and regards to part of Syria, to expand its territory. And I think that'll be made more clear to people. We don't know if they'll succeed in doing it, but that's what's going on. So this was billed as being why is there endless war? And I think that why there is endless war, first of all, is, of course, oil. There's, the movie, I don't know if people remember the movie, what's the, No, I was thinking of the movie that, it'll come to me in a second. It's, where there is oil, there will be blood. And it was just called There Will Be Blood. But it's about oil, and so that's the truth of the matter about, wars fought over oil resources. I mean, it's not really recalled that much that in World War II, when the U.S. entered World War II, the way they entered World War II was in North Africa. And the idea was to stop Germany from taking the oil resources that were in Iran, in the Middle East at that time. So there's been war after war after war that's gone on. But it's not just about oil profits, although profits are always very important to the oil companies. But it's more from a national security, quote unquote, political view. Who's going to control the oil? Who controls global oil? And you can see what that means if we see the situation with Cuba right now. Because Cuba doesn't have oil, or very, very little. And now they have been placed in the most dire circumstances. We have a number of people who are in Cuba right now, people who took solar panels to Cuba, people, Gloria La Riva, who's with the Otway project. They've taken large quantities, not as much as is needed, but large amounts of child cancer medicine, because Cuba has this great healthcare system, but it's broken down, and it's broken down to a very large degree because they don't have oil, because they can't, and they're blockaded in many ways. They have a biotech industry that has made many of its own, like including a vaccine that prolongs life for cancer victims, lung cancer victims. They had 5 different COVID vaccines that they developed. But they can't do it anymore. Now they can't do this because they can't get the raw materials for the biotech. They can't make that. They can make the medicines, but they have to have the raw materials. And the raw material that really affects all other phases of life really is oil, is fuel. And not having access to fuel means, just a catastrophic situation. And so we can see oil as a critical element about which numerous battles have been fought. The view about oil, it's very interesting. When the Arab revolutions, when the national liberation movements came after World War II, and there was a lot of hope that now the resources, like in the case of Iran, that the resources could be used by for the countries that possess the resources rather than just being exploited. And to some extent that has happened, and to some extent that to a large degree it hasn't happened. And the George Habash, who, if you ask people, Palestinian people, probably the most respected Palestinian leader, he's not alive anymore, it was George Habash. And I remember seeing him speak one time, and he said, you know, take the oil. Just take it. Just leave us alone, but take the oil. That it was not a blessing, that oil was a curse. Of course, it can be both things, but I think that, you know, so much focus has been on the Middle East and North Africa because of its oil resources, so much focus by the imperialist countries, by those who have exploited them in the past and wish to continue doing so, that it really, it's not a blessing, it is more of a curse than that. So we've seen this, the war after war after war. I think for the state of Israel, you have to ask the question also, why, we can understand, we don't support, we're completely opposed, we're fighting against the government of this country, which is carrying out war after war after war in many parts of the world, not just in the Middle East, but a lot in the Middle East. But why is Israel, the state of Israel, and this is the last thing I really want to talk about, and then I think we could have some discussion. Why is this small country constantly at war? I mean, you really have to ask that question. Why is it so militarily built up? I mean, it's a country, the population I think is 9 million people now. It's small, it has very limited resources. Why is it so constantly at war? It was at war in 48, it was at war from 1950 to 1956. There was a guerrilla movement of people who had been expelled. Extreme repression from Israel in regard to those movements. And then in 1956, they united with Britain and France to try to overthrow the government of Egypt and take back the Suez Canal. That was stopped by the U.S., which wanted to make it clear that the U.S. is now the dominant colonizing power, not England and France. And if the Israelis didn't back away on that, the U.S. would get them kicked out of the United Nations and they'd be done for. That's the Eisenhower regime told them. But that was a war. Then there was the 67 war. There was the 1970 war against the Palestinians inside of Jordan, but that was supported by the U.S. and Israel. There have been 7 invasions of Lebanon, starting in 1978. 7 different invasions of varying scale, varying scope. The biggest one, of course, being in 1982, when the southern part of the country was occupied, and after 18 years of resistance, they were driven out of southern Lebanon. But the wars have continued. And the wars against the Palestinians, I mean, war after war after war. I mean, and the way the media has treated those wars in the United States, has treated it here, is that, you know, it's just kind of a thing that happens. It's treated as a normal. I mean, Gaza has never had any air defenses. We should think about what that means. That means in every one of the wars against Gaza, in 2012 and 2014, what we've seen over the last years and others, the pilots never have to worry about anything. There's no, you know, they just bomb away and over and over and over again. And the wars that Israel is engaged in, I think really have to be understood. And the reason for those wars is that it is an irreconcilable problem, that Israel presents itself as as a country that really is outside the region. It's an implantation. It's a colonial implantation. And it's a European colonial implantation. Other people have come who aren't from Europe, but that's what it really is. And it can't reconcile itself with the region. It's at war. And it's had the most disruptive effect on life in the region. I mean, everybody has to think about, well, who will and where will Israel bomb if we take this step or we take that step? So it's played this role, and I think but it's fundamentally the reason that it's engaged in endless war is that it's really outside. It's a force that's come from outside and continues to represent not the interest of that region at all, but the region. It's really, in our book, we reprinted a document called Israel, Base of Western Imperialism from 1968 by an Egyptian scholar. And that was, that's the truth of the matter, I think, down till today. Israel has its own interests, but it also serves the interests of what continues to be the dominant Western colonialist, imperialist powers in the planet. So I'll stop at that point and let's have some discussion.
I'm sure we will have lots of questions for you, Richard. So if people haven't put them down on cards yet, please go ahead and do that. So I don't have any yet, so can I just start with one of mine? Is would you consider this to be a situation of the tail wagging the dog?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that Israel has its own interests that are different than the U.S. interests. The U.S. leadership, to one degree or another, given the fact of who the current leader is, are managing a world empire. I mean, I think from a lot of people's point of view, Trump is doing a very bad job of managing the world empire from the point of view of the empire itself. But that's what their foreign policy has to be based on. So they have other people who are really running the show to a large degree. Israel, as I said, wants to be a larger state. It wants to be a larger country. That desire has been there for a long time, and it continues to be. So they are allies. There's no question about that. But I don't think that carrying out a war like this or the other wars have been at the behest or that they have been dictated by Israel or the Israeli leaders.
We have a question about the United Nations and its role in all this.
What role?
Really, truly, you can comment on that at more length, but can the United Nations become more democratic? Why does the U.S. and Russia, that's the Security Council, have the veto powers? Can the structure of the UN and the Security Council change to make it more effective in the current climate?
Well, the problem is that the people who have to ratify the change are the people who would lose power, so they're not doing it. I mean, it's no one's going to give up. That really the idea of the United Nations from the beginning was it would be an agency for the U.S., which was emerging as the dominant power in the aftermath of World War II, to manage world affairs. And it didn't quite turn out that way. But I don't think there's much hope for any substantive structural change and power relationships within the. So there's the 5 members that have veto power, and none of them are going to give it up.
So there's really no hope in the UN helping to bring this war to a stop?
I think that the UN it's important from the point of view of information and understanding and getting, it has different agencies within it which produce material that's useful about human rights and so forth. But as far as an organization, I mean, just the U.S. has put a lot of pressure on. 135 countries voted for a resolution condemning Iran for bombing the U.S. allied states and bases in the. I don't know if people heard like a couple of weeks ago. Well, right after the war started with Iran, NBC News had an interview, and it was an interview with the Iranian foreign minister, and the NBC reporter said, "Well, how do you justify bombing U.S. bases?" And the foreign minister was kind of like, he was kind of startled by that question. He was like, "What? That's where the attacks are coming out." He said, "What did you want me to do? Send a thank you note?" But that's, I don't think that, yeah. Anyways, why don't we go on?
Well, if it won't come from the UN, I guess it's going to be people power. Now, we have the No Kings protest coming up this Saturday. By the way, I'll do a plug. We're doing a sign-making party in the chapel at 12:30 today. But many of us remember the Iraq War protests of 20 years ago or so, and the whole city was taken over by those. There were no blood for oil. By the way, I'd like to ask you if you think that that's an appropriate sign for Saturday. That was a big sign in the Iraq War protests, right? No blood for oil. Why aren't we seeing the kind of reaction from people like we did for the Iraq War years ago?
Well, that was partly what I wanted to say about the vilification, the demonization of Iran that's gone on for a long time. And also, I don't think we're at the end of this process. So if the troops go, I think that'll change things again. And I also think that time will tell. But I don't think that either the war has ended yet. That's clear. Nor has the anti-war movement reached the maximum of what it's going to. I think it's going to get. If the war continues, I think the anti-war movement will grow a lot. And it's not the same as either one of the Iraq wars. I think in the first Iraq war there was a great fear that there was it was the first big war like that where they sent a lot of troops, 500,000. It was the first one since Vietnam, and a lot of people thought it was going to be like Vietnam, and it wasn't. It wasn't like that in terms of Iraq just got pummeled, and there wasn't the kind of cost in human lives on the U.S. side.
Because no troops, there were troops on the ground where there aren't that.
There were troops on the ground in the second one,
yeah.
But the first one there weren't. So it was, yeah.
Could you speak to Israel Mossad's role in training the Shah's Savak and tell us what Savak is?
Yeah, the Savak was the secret police of Iran. It was created by the U.S. after the coup in 1953. It was at the beginning, for a while, headed by Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., who was the head of the New Jersey State Police at that time when he was appointed. And then there were other people who had been involved in other torture regimes were brought in and trained the Savak in the most horrific kinds of torture that they carried out. So it was another gift to the world of the CIA, of the Savak. But others were involved in it too.
I suppose that helps explain the death to Israel chants that are a regular feature of the protests in Iran.
Yeah, and I think there's that, and also there's been a deep sense of solidarity on Iran's part, given its own history with colonialism and the brutality that it suffered. I mean, it's like, the attitude toward Britain is tremendously hostile, and given what all Iranians know is the history of Britain's role in Iran.
You gave us a great recap of the history, but could you go over the Iran-Contra scandal and what that was about?
Yeah. So the Iran-Contra scandal came to light in 1987. The Iran-Iraq War had started in 1980 when Iran thought, given the chaos that was going on after the revolution in Iran, that they would be able to seize part of Iran. And I think the region is the Abadan region, which is an oil-producing region, where a lot of people speak Arabic. And they thought, and the U.S. encouraged this because, they wanted to bring down the Iranian government. And so the U.S. was supporting them. There's all the famous pictures of Rumsfeld, when he was Secretary of Defense, so-called, going there, meeting with Saddam Hussein, delivering lots of weaponry to them. And then there was a very surprising thing that came out in 1986, 87, that the CIA was also providing weapons through different channels to Iran. And what was really clear then was that what the U.S. view toward the Iran-Iraq war, the real view of the U.S. leaders, was we hope they killed each other. And Kissinger said something like that when he was asked about, in other words, Iran and Iraq both had the potential to be strong countries in this region where the U.S. did not want there to be strong countries, strong governments or strong states. They wanted them to be weak, divided. The U.S. at various times was supporting Kurdish uprisings in Iraq and Iran, and as part of this whole idea of like how can we weaken. This has been very dominant. The British Empire could only exist in the form that it did. You think of that little country, and then you think of the world. And how much of the world the sun never set. I mean, half of Africa was, well, it was all because they were able to keep people down, and they were able to divide in order to conquer. And it's a really refined, and the British did it, and the U.S. does it too. And if we think about the countries that have been torn apart and don't exist as they were before, Yugoslavia. It's several different countries now. Czechoslovakia was broken up. Libya is not one country anymore. Somalia is not one country anymore. These are all, countries where there was U.S. intervention that was designed to, if they couldn't dominate them completely, break them up.
Do you think that breaking Iran into smaller, less powerful countries is the goal of either the U.S. or Israel in this conflict?
I don't think they would mind. I mean, they broke up. They played a key role in breaking up the Soviet Union, and to all these different smaller states. I mean, I think that they have in mind China. I think that from the Chinese leadership's point of view, they see Taiwan, Tibet, Xinjiang as all. These are all areas that could be broken off. And yeah, so that continues. And I should say about the Iran-Contra affair, that involved also drug dealing in order to finance the sending of missiles, and the U.S. was really playing both sides against each other. And finally, they shot down an Iranian airliner over the Persian Gulf, with I think 280 people on board, and that was definitely a message. There was no question about it. That was a message. Then the message was that Iran had to end the war, and Iran was going to win the war probably at that point.
Okay, so the Strait of Hormuz is kind of at the top of the news cycle right now. Could you describe what that is and what would occur if the USA sends planes and helicopters over the straits? Or what are some of the strategies they're talking about for taking it, as Trump says they will do?
Well, they say 20% of the world's oil passes through the Straits of Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz, which connects the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman, and then the Indian Ocean. That amount of oil, if that amount of oil is blocked for very long, you can already see the results are that in many countries, including here, the price of gas is going up. And I mean, and it's not that it has to, it's that the oil companies, also see an opportunity. They're not for the Strait being blocked, but they don't mind raising the price, to put it mildly. So the Strait of Hormuz is considered one of those critical checkpoints, and in connecting, and this one is a particularly important one because of the oil and because of oil's importance in the world economy. And Iran has built up a lot of potential firepower overlooking the strait. And the U.S. Yesterday or the day before yesterday was dropping 5,000-pound bombs on that. So they're trying to. But they're not confident that they can do anything. They're not confident that they can use the strait right now. So this so-called war of choice, Class A war crime, is also having consequences for the U.S. and that we're not foreseen. And you have Trump who's deciding these things, who, despite being a despicable character in every respect, and I doubt anyone would really disagree here, but also is really very unpredictable. He's unpredictable in what he's doing and proclaims that he has the right to do whatever he wants to do, which is unusual for any leaders in the U.S. and historically to actually say that. I mean, they could do it, but.
What peace or truce can be expected when both sides declare that the other side should not even exist and should be expunged? Maximalist rhetoric on both sides.
And what are the both sides?
That would be Iran and the U.S., I suppose. Maybe Israel has a
Iran
different line of.
And Israel?
They didn't say, but I think that the sides are, roughly speaking, Israel and the U.S. and then Iran.
Yeah. So I mean, there was not a reason to launch a war against Iran. There was not a reason. This is a war that they decided, that the Trump administration decided to launch. So whatever each side says about each other, that's not really the thing that's decisive. The decisive is what are they going to do and what can they do. And I don't think that Iran can be destroyed. I think they're fighting, but they're suffering a lot of damage. I don't think either one of them are going away anytime soon.
Could you comment on the Women, Life, Freedom movement of 2022 in Iran and also the more recent protests, which I think were more economically driven just earlier this year and last year, struggles of Iranian people and prisoners, and also the huge numbers of execution by the Iranian regime?
Yeah. I mean, we don't, I don't support the Iranian government or its form of government, but we do support the idea that it's up to Iran to decide this. And for people who are trying, like in Washington, who are trying to utilize different policies or practices of the government and tell us that that's why they're doing what they're doing is a complete lie. This is just totally fabricated. Saudi Arabia is a close ally of the United States. Saudi Arabia has never had an election. I mean, women have very limited rights. And that goes for the other Gulf states as well. So they're all fine, that no one ever says anything. In the mainstream media here, there's never any discussion about the fact that these are police states. Iran has elections. Iraq had elections. I mean, you could complain about the election and say, oh, the election wasn't fair. But look across the Gulf there and, no election ever. And they can be friends with the United States. So, and I would say this, is that we want to be careful about joining in any campaigns by the leadership in the U.S. to demonize other countries.
Question, why is Trump afraid of Putin? What does Trump want from him personally? And could I just broaden this question a little bit too? Like, could you comment on Russia's role in this whole imbroglio that's happening now?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think there's been a lot of demonization also of Russia, and I think that I don't think Trump is afraid of Putin. I think Trump, I can do whatever I want. He means that and thinks that he can do it, and he's not. So there was the whole campaign that started when Trump was president to attribute the election of Trump to Russia, which I think was ridiculous. I mean, it was, even if you looked at objectively what they were talking about in terms of the stuff that was posted on the internet and the ads, they were nothing. But this was an attempt, instead of dealing with the issues as issues, we got an issue which completely backfired on the people who were promoting it, about Trump being, about Trump and Putin. That turned into really helping create the MAGA movement, and which is a terrible movement. But it helped. It actually helped them because it was so ridiculous, and. But I don't think there's fear that Trump is afraid of Putin.
Okay, we also have a question about China. Talk about China's relationship with Iran, and I think there's a proposal for yen being used to denominate oil exchanges, and could this lead to a sort of an upending of arrangements in the world order?
I don't think that it will. I don't think it'll change. There's been a lot of discussion about this. There's been a lot of discussion about the BRICS having currency that could be in place of the dollar, but the BRICS is kind of broken up too. In reality, India is now trying to develop, and it is developing, more of a relationship, including a military relationship with Israel, and is at odds with and with the U.S. So I don't think that appears to be in a much weaker position than it was fairly recently.
Mm-hmm. I think we had a related question, but someone said, while I hope the U.S. and Israel will suffer a defeat in this war, but these are negative regimes, the theocratic Iranian government is also extremely patriarchal and oppressive. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, we're not talking about defending the Iranian government. Iran has a sovereign right as a country to determine its own future and its own policies and so forth. And we don't agree with some of them for sure. But I think we also have to say that the position of women in Iran is much stronger than the position of women in Saudi Arabia. There's really no comparison at all. And this has come from a number of activists who visited Iran, who met with women's groups and so forth, which isn't to say that women have full rights, but the presentation here is really, again, very, very much very subjective based on what the foreign policy objectives are. And a great deal of the mass media, just plays into that. Yeah.
Someone asked about Mike Huckabee, that's the U.S. ambassador to Israel, who made comments recently about Israel expanding between the Euphrates and the ocean. That's the greater Israel concept, I guess. What does the Christian nationalist point of view have to do with this war we're having now?
Well, they're all for the war, and they're all for Israel expanding. They're also profoundly anti-Semitic, because their idea of things is that, Israel was reborn after thousands of years, It came back into being. It's a necessary step in the final, whatever. And then, so Israel's back, and then there's going to be there's a war, and so maybe this is the war, and the final war, and then there's how many years is it? 7 years or something like that after the war, and then Jesus comes back and kills everybody, and they kill everybody who doesn't agree with their version of, Christianity, and that means the Jewish people too, of course.
Hasn't Hegseth been leading prayers that have that apocalyptic point of view? It's really scary stuff.
Yeah, I mean and we should really realize. I mean, that's what they really stand for is, and the Israelis don't care. The Israeli leadership is like, they put them up in 5-star hotels and wine and dine them and bring them to their country. It's really amazing. What
do you think the Epstein files scandal has to do with all of this? How much of this is a distraction? The work created as a distraction from the Epstein files scandal?
Well, I heard somebody, I think they were making a joke, I'm not sure, but who said, well, at the beginning of the war with Iran, it was to divert attention away from the Epstein files. But now the war is going so badly that maybe he wants to bring up the Epstein files so people don't talk about the war, which I think could very well be true.
Okay, we're now moving into questions. More of these have to do with Israel. Ilan Pappé has written a book called Israel on the Brink, in which he says that the Zionist regime is fatally weakening. He sees an opening for a new society to emerge that would be more inclusive and democratic and end Palestinian oppression. What is your view of that?
I wish it was true. I have a great respect for Ilan Pappé. He's done a lot, and he continues to do a lot, and it's very important. But I just don't. I've heard this from other people too, and I don't see it. I don't see what's happening. I don't think they're getting weaker. As a matter of fact, one of the things that's happening with the state of Israel is that the leaders in Israel have always been afraid that the population would leave. It's the most. It's a population that has the most number of people who have multiple passports. I think it's the most in percentage in the world. And so they've had to worry about this. They've had to make all kinds of deals, like taking money from West Germany in the early 1950s because the economy was going to collapse and so forth. But now the people who are leaving, I think the liberal and left people are the ones leaving Israel, which doesn't mean that it can't run into a big crisis or something like that. But that's who's going because they don't want to live. A lot of people we don't want to characterize paint with the same brush all Israeli people. A lot of people in Israel, not a majority, unfortunately, but a lot of people are disgusted with what's happening. And there's terrorism going on. You can read about it today in the New York Times or in the media. In the West Bank, real terrorism going on, where multiple people are being killed and all kinds of stuff that's happening. So that's that, and a lot of Israelis are disgusted with what's happening, but they're leaving. So that's why, to me, I'm thinking, well, it's good people are leaving, but who's leaving, and what is it going to mean in terms of the policies? It's not going to mean. I don't think it'll mean anything better. In the immediate sense, and the big majority of Israelis support the war on Iran.
Yes, I've heard that too. Like 93% polling is supportive. It's like wall-to-wall support in Israel.
Yeah.
Okay, you've already commented you don't think it's a tail wagging the dog situation, but we have a couple of questions here about AIPAC. If we could expose AIPAC to Americans, would that help change our policies in support for Israel? And then the second question is, do you think the midterms will show a strong support for candidates not accepting AIPAC funding?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think. I mean, I don't think the average person, working class person, thinks a lot about AIPAC. You know, I don't think that's like that's what people are really focusing on. I think that AIPAC has lost a lot of standing. I think what happened is that the Palestinian struggle has discredited Israel to a very large degree. What's happened in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, has discredited Israel in the minds of a lot of people, and particularly young people. And in the younger age demographics, 18 to 29, and then the next 29 to whatever, Israel is now less support than the Palestinians, for the first time in U.S. But I don't think that AIPAC will have an influence on, for sure, because they have a lot of money. So there's buys a lot of TV ads and that kind of thing. So they have influence, but I think it's wrong to think that they're the ones who are determining the U.S. policy.
Thank you. We'll have to wrap up in a minute, and we couldn't get to all the questions, but we've covered a lot of these topics already. We do have a couple here about Cuba.
Yeah.
So what is the government of Cuba expected to do if Trump threatens to bomb them or send troops there? And the second question is, regarding Cuba, is PSL our answer helping them and folks to contribute in some way to helping Cuba?
The situation is very dire in Cuba. It's the most dire it's been since the revolution. And it's what makes it the most dire is the state sponsor of terrorism designation, which means, and this goes for Iran and North Korea and Cuba, the only countries in the world that deserve this so-called, according to the U.S. government, state sponsor of terrorism means that no banks in the world will deal with you. And if no banks will deal with you, you can't have trade. And you can't make large purchases, and all these kind of things. And it came about. It's really something. There were negotiations in Cuba that U.S. agreed to, the UN agreed to, everybody agreed to, and it was between the factions in the FARC and the ELN in Colombia, who had been in armed struggle against the government for many years. And it was to have a peace agreement, and the FARC agreed, and the ELN did not agree to the terms of it. So the agreement had been that the negotiators could come to Cuba, they'd be protected when they were there, they wouldn't be arrested, they could go back home. And the U.S., when the negotiations broke down, demanded from the Cuban government that it turn over the ELN negotiators, and Cuba didn't do it. They refused to do it because of the agreement that had been made. And so the U.S. then declared that it was Cuba was a state sponsor of terrorism. That was the pretext for this. So this is continuing, and it's doing tremendous damage, and it has done tremendous damage to Cuba. It's a brutal policy. It's a cruel policy. It's like, I think we all have seen that Trump likes cruelty. I mean, he wants to make things as vicious as possible and treat people as badly as possible. That's a real thing. So they have people in the Cuban Americans in the government who are advising how can we most harm Cuba, and they've been doing this for a while. How can we cause the greatest harm? And they know the insides and outs of how the Cuban system works, so they've been successful in causing this. So we are supporting the projects that are going on, the projects that include solar panels as a way to get. You can't do it. It's not going to happen immediately, but that's very important. And here in San Francisco, based is the Hot the Way project. And it's a project that brings child cancer medications to Cuba. And a lot of those diseases, particularly leukemia, is like I think 80 to 90% curable if you have the right drugs for children. But if you don't have the drugs, then then you don't, and then there's the consequences of that. So we have raised somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 worth and bought medicine at wholesale price for that and sent it. So we want to support everything that everybody's doing. This is it's really a horrific policy that's being carried out. But the Cubans are determined, and the Cubans are revolutionary. Not all of them, of course, but many of them are very devoted to continuing the struggle. And hopefully there will be other developments that happen that help them.
We're having a talk here in mid-May on Cuba. A doctor who's spoken here before, Dr. Mark, I forgot his last name right now. You might know.
Yeah.
What's his last name? You remember? Okay. So yeah, he's involved in sending humanitarian and medical supplies to Cuba. So please come back for that. Okay. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, thanks.
Really great insights. I'll just close with a couple of announcements. So at 12:30, there's sign making for No King's Day in the chapel. And then next Sunday, Meg Taylor Greene will be speaking to us to round out Women's Month. She'll be talking about the important civil rights attorney and Fagin Ginger. So please come back for that next Sunday. Okay, and then we'll have 2 weeks off and come back for Earth Day month's
Can
topics.
I just add one thing? So, everyone, or not everyone, but a lot of people are looking to the midterm elections. There's not going to be the salvation. The salvation is going to be us. It's the people, what people do now is really, really critical. And this has a potential to be the biggest day of mass mobilization. You don't know until you see it happen, but biggest day of mass mobilization potentially in U.S. history, and that's what we need. They're on the defensive. The Trump and his whole horrific crew, they're on the defensive now, but they can regain their footing too, and we don't want them to. We want to have a huge turnouts next week.
No King's Day. Let's all get out there this Saturday.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.